kick off the Building Your Volunteer Team webinar, I'm just going to do a couple of quick introductions. So I'm Steph Allmark, Volunteer Manager at the RFU, and behind the scenes we have Alex Thompson, who'll be making sure it all runs smoothly. And then we also have Sophie Collier, Volunteer Project Officer, and Zoe Pulling, Club Developer from the Eastern region on the call. And they'll be helping to bring some of the things that we talk about to life through club examples. So why are we delivering this webinar tonight? We all know that clubs are much more than just the players on the pitch, and that volunteers are an integral part in maintaining success, keeping things running and ultimately creating that sense of community. But with everything else that's going on at clubs, there may be times when volunteering isn't as high on the agenda as other areas. And as a result, it can cause challenging situations when volunteers do step away and there's no one in place to pick up the reins. So this webinar has been developed to hopefully give you some ideas on how to take a proactive approach to volunteer recruitment. And we're going to bring this to life with some club examples. And whilst we're not specifically going to talk about succession planning in this session, everything that we do talk about tonight will lead towards this. So just to mention that throughout the webinar, I will refer to clubs, but the same information and principles can be applied to constituent bodies and referee societies, as I know that there's a few people from these organisations as well that have joined the webinar tonight. So what we're going to look at over the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to explore a volunteer framework to help you consider your approach to volunteer management, how to review your current volunteer workforce and identify what is needed, ideas and real-life examples of how to take that proactive approach, and we'll also ensure that you know how to access resources to support in this area. We also know that the majority of you on this call are volunteers yourselves and will only have so much capacity. So we don't by any means expect you to be able to implement everything we talk about, but we've developed the content to hopefully give you one or two ideas that you can take away, discuss with the club and put into action. So the first thing that we're going to look at tonight is the volunteer framework. I'm not going to spend too long on this, and it's something that you may have come across before, but just thought it was worth revisiting. So the volunteer framework that we use has got 7 key stages, and this can help you to review your volunteer offer. So as I talk through each stage, it's worth just having a think about what your club does well in this area and where your club could potentially develop or introduce a little bit more. So the first one we've got is inspire. That's the message and the stories that we tell and the images that we're using in order to attract audiences into volunteering. Recruit, so this is the part that we'll focus on in today's session. So that's where and how you communicate with potential volunteers, and that'll be the focus. Train and develop, so how to support volunteers to meet their goals as well as the clubs. Then you've got retain, which is building on the train and develop piece. So this is all about creating that positive environment so that people continue to help out. We know there's no point in recruiting a whole load of new volunteers if people are dropping out just as quickly. Reward, recognise and celebrate. So how to ensure volunteers feel appreciated. This isn't just about the awards, but the saying the thank yous, the sending the happy birthday message, the sending the personalised message. And then amplify. So how we get the messages out there, both about recruitment, but also about celebrating impact, which is just as important. So do our platform showcase volunteering? And this is something that I think across sectors we could get better at. And then underpinning all of this is inclusion and diversity. So making sure opportunities are accessible and that the digital infrastructure and safeguarding, which our safer recruitment guidance can help with, is in place. So we just wanted to mention this framework at the start of the webinar as it's something that could help you to think about the volunteer management at your club. And as I say, there's probably some areas that you're doing really well and some that you could maybe improve or do some development in. And this can be found on our website if you did want to use it as a basis for a discussion at your club. So considering the framework, I am going to hand over to Sophie to launch the first poll.
Lovely. So we're just going to get an understanding of who's attending this evening and kind of what sort of point you're at the moment. So I'll launch the first poll, which is asking you, does your club have enough volunteers to support your activity this season? So you've got 3 options there of yes, no, and don't know. I'll give you a few seconds to answer that. And for those that are answering no, if there's anything in particular that you're struggling with that you might want to pop in the chat, that's always useful to know. And even if you've said yes, are there places where you've got volunteers who are doing multiple roles, and perhaps it would actually benefit you to have some more volunteers in place? So I'll just give a couple more seconds. If for any reason you can't see the polls, do feel free to pop your answers in the chat. But that is almost everybody who's filled in that first poll. So I will end that one and share the answers with you. So does your club have enough volunteers to support your activity? The majority there are saying no. You can obviously see that's a really high percentage there. For that question, we've got a couple of don't knows and a few yeses as well. So on to our next poll, which is thinking ahead to kind of this time next year and the kind of activity that you might be thinking about doing next season. Do you have enough volunteers to support your activity next season? So again, we've got those three answers there of yes, no, and don't know. So I'll just give you a few moments to fill that one in. And just wait for those to come through. Thank you, by the way, everyone, for filling these in so quickly. Great, so I will end that one there and share those results with you. You can see on this one, obviously we've got quite a few no's again, but there are a few more don't knows on this one. And I think that is obviously probably because we're talking about in a year's time and it is difficult to know where you're going to be at that time. But hopefully this will get you kind of thinking, like Steph said, about that kind of succession planning piece and where you're going to be at that time. So I will stop sharing this one with you and we will head on to the next one. And so this is about how proactive you are in terms of your recruitment of volunteers. So there's three options there that you can choose from about when you kind of recruit volunteers. Are you recruiting volunteers throughout the year? Are you recruiting volunteers when you know that volunteers will be stepping away? Or are you recruiting at the point where a volunteer has actually left? Again, answers coming in really quickly, so thank you so much for this. Great, just a few more seconds and I'll share those ones with you. Lovely, let me just share those results with you. So you can see there, the majority are recruiting throughout the year or when you know that volunteers are going to be stepping away, and just a couple of people who are doing their recruitment once a volunteer has left. And then our final poll for now is about meetings. And quite a simple yes or no answer. Do you have volunteering as a standing agenda item at your meetings at the moment? Any thoughts on this would be welcome as well. So if you do have that as a standing agenda item, is there kind of a main focus that tends to come up when you're having those conversations around volunteering? And if you don't have it as an agenda item, what's the thing that's stopping you from doing so? Is it just that you've not thought about it? You've tried it, it didn't work? Or maybe that's just an idea that you're going to take away with you after today. So I will just a couple more people to fill that one in, and then I'll share those results with you as well. Great, thank you. I'll just end that one. And you can see there it's actually almost a 50-50 split there in terms of people who do, yes, have that as a standing agenda item, and those that don't. So that might just give you something to go away and think about if it's not a standing agenda item at the moment. And that is all of our polls for now.
Thank you very much, Sophie. So hopefully that has just got you thinking a little bit more about the volunteer landscape at your club. And based on the responses, we know that recruitment of volunteers can be a challenge. And this isn't something that's unique to rugby. It's been felt across the sporting landscape and also wider. And I think it's been accelerated over the last couple of years. So before the season starts, it's a really good time to consolidate what your club's aims are, what you're looking to achieve this season and potentially beyond, and perhaps most importantly, who's actually going to help you get there. So I'm sure that the majority of people on this call will have a plan in place, but if you do need support with that particular area, we have got an online module to help with the club planning, and we'll pop a link in the chat to that now so that you can have a look at that if it's something that you want to explore in more detail. But knowing what you're looking to achieve, you can then look at who you currently have to help achieve this and what other roles or skill sets you may need. And to help with this, you may have already seen this, but we've got a volunteer map that you can work through. So there's an example of that on the screen now. And again, we'll pop a link to that in the chat. And this just helps to understand who is doing what within the club, identify where there may be gaps, and also identify where one person is holding too many of these roles. And by working through that as a club, you can then identify what roles you need to recruit for. And then the next step would be, well, okay, we need these roles, but actually, how can these roles be split down into tasks? We know that one of the biggest barriers to people volunteering is, of course, time. So advertising tasks rather than roles is a really good way of getting more people through the door. So to help with this, before advertising a role, and this is something that you may already do, it's just worth considering a few things. So what tasks make up the role, and are there different buckets that these tasks could fall into? So if there is a current role holder that's stepping away, could you ask them to write down all the tasks that they currently do, and could that be split into 2, 3, 4 different areas? Could the role be shared between a couple of people? Is this a longer term role, or is it actually a time-defined task that could be done by a project group? And could it be done flexibly? So does it have to be done face-to-face, or could it be done online? Is there a certain day or time that it needs to be done, or actually can it be done at a time that suits that individual? And once you've got the answers to that, making it really clear in any communication about the role. And I know that might sound like a challenge because then you've then got to recruit more people for one role, but actually it becomes a far more appealing proposition to a wider audience. And to bring to life how the volunteer map was used successfully by a club, I'm just going to hand over to Zoe to talk through a club example.
Thanks, Steph. So we are talking about Thirskir today. The club itself is an umbrella club, so it works with athletics on the race course. They were looking to refresh and develop their business plan and their club plan. So it was a great opportunity to engage with members, players, and the wider community. So as part of this, they held their own development day. Through the development day, they built on some of the findings they had from a club survey that they took, and then to understand it further, pulled out bits and pieces through these conversations. They had 20 people take part in it and develop this further. Alongside the survey, it highlighted that they wanted to strengthen their community work in the first place, along with their age grade sections. So from here, they could then map the volunteers that they currently had, the roles they were looking to introduce or to develop. And then equally, as Steph's mentioned, where things can be split down into particular tasks, task and finish groups, working parties, and further through to the bits and pieces. It then helps to cement and confirm that actually you don't need to give up hours and hours and hours, and it doesn't need to become an onerous task. It can be quite fun. You can get involved, you can give back to your community, you can develop the club yourself. So throughout this process, they were able to communicate that, talk to their volunteers, drive through their ethos and values, which then helps to bring people in and build a community atmosphere. A great example of what actually happened on the day was the fact that they had one of their junior parents who really wanted to get involved in the club, but was quite concerned about getting involved and the time it would take. By having these conversations, they were able to engage with them directly, but equally the group. And actually what he then understood is he could get involved in coaching. He could be the assistant coach, so he could dip in and dip out as he needed to. And because of that, the map then showed that he could do it. He could clearly understand what the expectations were of him and the role, and he could then take the time he needed to do other tasks in his life, work, family, and other commitments.
Brilliant, thanks Zoe. So once you know the roles and tasks that you that are needed, it's important to advertise these in the right way. So as we all know, there's countless volunteering opportunities out there. So how can we advertise the roles to get those opportunities to stand out? And there's 4 key areas that I thought it would be useful to just touch on today. So the first is around the language. So being upbeat and personable in recruitment material can lead to people being more likely to engage. I think something that we are perhaps all guilty of in sport is use of jargon and acronyms. So if someone doesn't know what something means, they won't necessarily be confident to put themselves forward. And sometimes it can just be second nature to go into the acronym or the jargon. So something just to consider after this webinar is have a look at the latest role descriptions or tasks that you've put out there and just see if there are any acronyms or jargon that you've used in your role profiles. And actually, could you talk about it in a slightly different way, just to make sure it's really understandable what is being asked? And also just thinking about how the ask is made. So actually, is volunteering the right word, or is helping out or coming to support better? We know that volunteering can be linked with a high level of commitment, which in some cases is absolutely required, but isn't always the case. And always stay away from the word job when recruiting for voluntary roles, as this implies payment and contracts. So as well as the language, consider the visuals. And again, I'm sure stuff that you've already thought about, but I thought just worth reiterating today. So do the photos that you're using across your communication channels include people from all sections of the club doing varied tasks, just to showcase that breadth of opportunity. So understandably, it's more likely that you'll have photos of coaches or match officials or people that are on the pitch. They can be front and centre and visible, but also just try and showcase as well the behind the scenes roles and what opportunities there are there. So an example of this is one club actually split their roles into inside roles, outside roles, and incognito roles. So outside covered the coaching, the ground staff, the car parking. Inside were things like the club shop, the kitchen, the bar, and then incognito was some of the behind the scenes stuff. So the social media, the sponsorship, the event planning, and that just ensured that they showcase the different roles and also appeal to different motivations as well. There's, of course, several different ways to do this, but just putting that focus on the behind the scenes roles may engage a different audience that haven't necessarily thought about these roles are required to run a rugby club. And then just think about how we can make the material as eye-catching as possible. So what are the key bits of information that you need to get across? Don't necessarily have to dive straight into it with a role descriptor. This can be a conversation with the volunteer when they are interested or recruited to see what's within and out of scope. So just as an example of that, instead of advertising for an events lead and going into all the detail, you could just advertise for someone who enjoys planning and organising, enjoys bringing people together, and has got plenty of energy and ideas. The third point I'm just going to touch on is time. So we've already talked about time being one of the major barriers to volunteering. So just making sure that whenever you're recruiting for new roles or tasks, really clear in that time commitment. So be honest, but also provide flexibility in the amount of time needed to volunteer and how it can be done. So as mentioned previously, can you give those options to help as a one-off to avoid people being put off by a bigger commitment? And do people always need to be down at the club, or can they do some of those tasks from home? Just so somebody can see how they might fit it around their lifestyle. And then finally, and I think it's one that perhaps we sometimes forget about, is making sure that the benefits of volunteering are clear. And I know this sounds really obvious, and many people think about volunteering as giving back, which it absolutely is, but there's also a lot of personal benefits as well. So I'm sure when you think back to when you started volunteering, there's several different motivations that you had. And one of the strongest we know is to feel part of that community and create stronger relationships. So again, just thinking about back to any of the marketing or the communications that you put out about volunteer roles, does it emphasise the social benefits? Does it emphasise how fun it can be? Does it talk about how it can build confidence, mental and physical well-being? And does it talk about how it could add to your CV? So once you know what roles and tasks you need help with, and you've got the material to promote it, the next step is getting out there. So who do you currently reach out to? So nationally, around 20% of people who hadn't volunteered in the last 12 months said it was because they'd never been asked. So it sounds so simple, but just make sure that you are making the ask. Membership is the most obvious category to ask. So it'd be just interesting to have a bit of a reflect whilst on this webinar, just to think about when was the last time that you actively reached out to your membership to ask if they were willing to help out. It may have been recently, it may not have been for a season or two. And membership is the most obvious category, like I said, but actually creating that volunteer form as well can help you to get to know your members better, so you know where their skill or passion lies and match them up with volunteer opportunities. Now, we do have a template that can help with that, but we'll also pop an example from Hartlepool in the chat about how they went about capturing interest from the wider membership. And whilst membership is a captive audience, it's also worth thinking about how you can get that message out more widely. So using the connections you have to engage with your local community. Again, we've got a 10-step guide on how to engage with your local community, from mapping organisations through to where to advertise, and we'll pop a link to the chat and include in the follow-up email. The most obvious way to reach outside your membership is social media. And it may not be successful every time, but there's many examples of where it has worked. So a couple that spring to mind, so Peterborough, and there might actually be someone on the call from Peterborough, so if there is, great to hear more about that, recruited one of their volunteers via a Facebook post. So the volunteer didn't have any connection to the club, but she wanted to help out in a community and saw it advertised. Bolton put an advert out on LinkedIn and they managed to recruit a marketing and communications lead. Again, no connection to the club, but just really wanted to help out in a local community, had a skill set because that was a role that they did in the day job, and put themselves forward for the role. Another option would be to advertise amongst educational establishments. So I'm sure that the majority of you have got links to your local educational establishment through existing members. And again, there's many examples of where this has been successful. So actually one of the volunteers at Dartford originally helped out to get hours towards a sports therapy course. She became the physio and she's then gone on to become the chair. And then finally, something which you may have heard of, the Community Voluntary Service. So they often have online systems where you can advertise roles for free, and they've got databases of people that are looking for volunteer roles. So for the time it takes to share your opportunity, definitely worth putting it on there. So we're just going to spend the next 10 minutes or so focusing on how your club can tie in a volunteer recruitment drive and getting the word out with some existing events or platforms that you already have without creating too much additional work. So approaching people in person when they're actively engaged in the club, such as parents when they're stood on the sidelines, absolutely valuable. But a focused event around volunteering and volunteer recruitment can help to put volunteering in the spotlight and raise awareness amongst a much wider membership. So the activities that we're going to speak about are volunteer open evenings or recruitment events, club workforce day, and social media. And these activities provide a really good platform to get more people on board. And if anyone on here has had success with any of these, we'd love to hear about it in the chat. What works well, what would your top tips be, etc., as I'm talking through some of these and using a couple of examples. So as mentioned previously, we know the majority of people may not volunteer because they don't actually realise that clubs are volunteer run. And I think that's becoming more of a challenge with anecdotal feedback that more people are seeing clubs as a business. So less and less thinking actually they're volunteer run, or they might need people to step forward and help. So again, not to answer now, but just want to have a think about and take away. When was the last time you communicated with a wider membership about the number of volunteers it takes to run your club? Events such as those on the screen now can really help make people aware of this, as well as highlighting the benefits of volunteering. So we'll take the volunteer open evening first. So a volunteer open evening, again, I'm sure a few of you may have run this, so it'd be great to hear how you got on, provides the opportunity to let members know what it takes to run a club. You could hold this as a standalone event, but actually you could just tie it into an existing one. So after a summer session, during the first weekend back, linked to an end of season celebration, however it's held, there's a few key things that I thought were worth mentioning and just to consider. So the first and foremost, and the most obvious, who to invite. So just get the message out far and wide and encourage people to bring someone along not connected to the club to broaden your reach. Keeping your talk to less than an hour. So share information on what the club is all about and the tasks that people could do. So you could ask a couple of current volunteers if they'd be happy to provide an overview of what they do, the impact they've had, and the benefits it's given them. You don't need to go into the detail of training and appointments at this stage. The aim is just to give people that overview of what the club is all about and inspire them to find out more. So really sell yourself, be clear what you're about, the great things you offer, and what the next steps are if somebody is interested. And then going back to that earlier point, and I don't think I can emphasize this enough, just making it clear that there's those one-off tasks, projects, events, as well as some of the longer term permanent roles. And also dispelling the myth that all volunteer roles are time consuming and require rugby specific skills. We know that there's a lot of roles that don't require those rugby specific skills. We do have a Dispelling Myths handout that we can pop in the chat and also circulate after, which you can use to help with this, and we'll pop this in there now. And then finally, and I know this is obvious and I'm sure everyone's done it, just make it that social event, couple it with a pie and a pint or a barbecue to try and drive attendance and get more people down. We have actually just pulled together a template that you could use for your volunteer open evening, and we're looking to pilot that and get some feedback on it. So if that's something that you'd be interested in, then please pop a message into the chat or drop us an email at volunteers@rfu.com. And again, we'll also paste that into the chat so you can have a look. So just let us know if you'd be interested in that volunteer open evening template to give it a try at your club. And then finally, once that event's been delivered, just following up with those who attend to thank them and remind them of next steps. So this could be using a closed Facebook group, it could be a WhatsApp group or community, or it could be a platform such as Spond. We've had a couple of clubs that have run some successful volunteer recruitment events last season. So I'm just going to hand over to Zoe now to talk through a couple of those to bring it to life.
Hey, thanks, Steph. So the first club we're talking about is Malden. As you can see, they'd celebrated their 75th anniversary and really wanted to build on their community engagement, but also recognised that actually to be able to do this and do this as well as they wanted to, they needed more people. So as we mentioned, they progressed with a volunteer evening, and it's a great way to have both those current volunteers and those of you on this call mixed with those who want to get involved, aren't sure quite how to, or aren't quite sure if it's for them. So it's a great networking opportunity, hear about how they can get involved, bring everyone together, gather that community and club spirit. Through this, they were then able to share their mission, share their plans, talk about more how they can help, and equally talk about those tasks and roles that people get involved in, whether they want to dip in and do a couple of hours here or there, or take on something a little bit bigger. They progressed this using some of the resources that we had and talked through it, much like we've said about the template for the volunteer evening. And gathering speed with this, they then did a DIY day at the club, which a few of you have mentioned in the chat. But actually they managed to join it up with the cricket club, which really engaged everyone in the club and equally the cricket club, and got those mixing to build a community atmosphere. It was really about that messaging and that community and that getting involved that led to them recruiting who they then gained. So looking at those new 5 first aiders, social media coordinator, and on and off pitch support, along with that succession planning and creating new methods and new resources to see them really embed it at the club. So much as we talked about the pie and a pint, very much one that gets us all down the club, let's face it. Our next club here is very much taken that to heart and put it forwards. So they hosted a volunteers pie and pint night alongside their touch and tag to explain what it takes to get rugby to actually happen. All of us on this call know that, yes, we see those clubs, those resources, those coaches, and think that it might not be run by a volunteer. They'd got a few volunteers doing many roles, which I know a few of you on here have the similar challenge. But through it, they were able to share this graphic, which I, much like you do, really feel that this explains who we are, what we do, and actually how much it takes to get the game to go on. Through the volunteer evening, they were able to dispel actually every little helps. You can take on big, small tasks, you can take on roles, you can build on those signs of things and showcase what it gets to go. But equally, they raised awareness to the fact that you are all volunteers and the club is very much volunteer-led. By doing this, it enabled current volunteers to be a little bit more strategic and to really focus on what they wanted to, but also got more people involved on day-to-day activities. They got some of the ideas that they put forward by taking part in one of the cluster events that happen with club developers such as myself, and their session was very much focused on volunteers sharing best practice, talking about challenges and what they could take forward next.
Brilliant, thanks Zoe. So we've covered the volunteer evening, and another activity which I know has come up in the chat a lot already, so most people on this call are aware of, is the club workforce day or volunteer work party. So I don't want to go into the detail of this, as I know there's a few people that have already talked about it and shared some good ideas, but I just wanted to touch on the things that specifically related to the volunteer engagement perspective. So once you've decided what needs doing, you've chosen your date and time, you've of course completed your risk assessment, key to success from a volunteer side is promotion of the event to not only club members but the local community. And that just links back to the earlier conversation around how to get the message out there. So could you share the day on other organisations' platforms? So could it be active partnerships? Could it be something called the Big Help Out, which Sophie will touch on in a little bit? Or could it be a spotted page on Facebook? Again, incentives such as bring a friend can work well. So just as an example, Scouts have an initiative called Good for Two. This encourages existing volunteers to bring someone along who doesn't normally help out. And actually, it puts the benefits of volunteering front and centre as well. At the event, as well as completing the activity, whatever that might be, key to engaging volunteers in the longer term is providing that welcoming environment for those attending. So that starts with having people on hand to answer questions that people might have about the day, but also about tasks or roles that are available longer term at the club, and having that basic form to capture contact details with their permission so you can follow up after the event. And of course, as with the volunteer recruitment evening, providing refreshments just gives you that opportunity as well to speak to those that are down on the day about what the club is looking to achieve and who you are looking to recruit to help out with that. Where these type of events can sometimes fall down is that follow-up. So sending the thank you and sharing any upcoming opportunities that you've got with that emphasis on flexibility and the tasks that are available. And again, that can be done with the volunteer closed Facebook group, a WhatsApp community, or a different platform. And then finally, just on this one, and as simple as it sounds, don't forget to share photos from the day, just to make that wider audience aware of the work that goes on behind the scenes and how they can get involved if they would like to. So I'm just going to hand over to Sophie to talk about Old Allianz in a little bit more detail.
Yes, so this is a club that used the Big Help Out to help with their workforce day. If you don't know what the Big Help Out is, it was the second year of it this year, and it's basically a national weekend of volunteering. So it was started last year as part of the King's Coronation weekend, and then this year it was moved to be the final weekend of Volunteers Week that takes place in the first week of June. And it's a really great kind of national campaign. There's lots of celebrities involved, getting people talking about volunteering and encouraging people to help out in their local community. So what the club did here was they wanted to spruce up the club and through that engage a wider audience to help out there. So they used the Big Help Out platform. You can log in online like on a laptop, but most people do it through an app as well, and through the app you can check locally as to what your opportunities are in your area. So they registered their opportunity on there, and they had 3 volunteers from outside of their club membership who came and joined and helped for the day, as well as current membership who came along, and they were also supported by their local Good Gym team. Obviously here we're not talking about huge numbers, but those 3 volunteers could make a massive difference. So if they came along, had a really positive experience, really enjoyed themselves, and then wanted to come back again next year to help out, or it might be that actually there's something else at the club that they'd be interested in doing, those 3 volunteers could make a huge difference to the volunteers that are already there and take some things off their workload as well. So a really successful event for them to take part in last year, and I know they did it again this year as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sophie. So that brings us on quite nicely to the final activity that we're going to talk about today, and that's social media. So putting volunteering in the spotlight. So as well as in-person events, using communication channels to make people aware the club is run by volunteers can be really impactful, and creating that sense of community and actually all in it together. So we have developed a series of assets to support with this. So there's an example of that on the screen now with the Find Your Place on the Team. So if you are thinking about using social media to put volunteering front and centre, please do get in touch if you'd like to use them. And also just wanted to touch on again a couple of things that you might want to consider. So first of all, identifying your requirements. So this is something that we've talked about already. So how many and which roles and tasks are you looking to recruit for? And then creating that plan. It doesn't need to be complicated, but it can just look at how over the next 3 to 4 weeks are we going to promote volunteering, put it front and centre, and have some regular nudges to drive action and encourage people to put their hand up and help out. And then just thinking about the tone of voice and imagery and a name that can tie it all together. So we've gone with Find Your Place on the Team, but I'm sure at your clubs, you've got a number of different things that you use when you're talking to your volunteers. And we've also shared on the screen there just an example from Hartlepool as well, which talks about the flexibility in terms of the tasks, the benefits of volunteering, and what the next steps are in terms of registering your interest. And I think that's really important in terms of that clear call to action. So who do they need to get in touch with, and what are the next steps if they're interested? Another club that put a Facebook post out actually had a message us button at the bottom of their Facebook post, difficult to say. And that took the person that clicked on it straight through to a WhatsApp message to the volunteer coordinator with how can I find out more about the roles message. So straight away that communication was starting. Completely understand that it's important to make sure you get the right person for the right role. And whilst not everyone who responds to social media posts may be the right person, just increasing that awareness and the number of people interested will hopefully increase the chances of finding someone who can make a difference. And actually, if the person isn't right for a specific role, is there other tasks in the club that they could help with? And I'll just hand over to Zoe now to talk through an example from Thanet.
So this one is very much one that is a day-to-day activity for us all. We all get bogged down in the running of the club and making sure players are actually on the grass, having a good time. So very much social media played a key element in their experience here. They realised that actually they were getting stuck in the operational and weren't able to take that step and go to what they wanted to be in the future, who they want to see and who they want to get involved. So the volunteer map itself really helped them to see where they got the gaps, look at how they could maybe delegate responsibilities, spread responsibilities, and build that, but equally then highlighted what they wanted. So they could go out very much for targeted responses, targeted roles, targeted efforts. Through social media, they were able to build their presence and very much use the club colours, the club brand, and the club experience to pull it all together. It keeps and builds on the brand across the piece, builds experience of the volunteers themselves, but equally we all know just because you live in the local area, you might not play rugby, but you're very much interested in it, you may want to get involved. And through this they were then able to attract a new volunteer from the outset. Chris really started this by opening his message with these roles are open to new people, new ideas, which certainly got the result there, as you can see. It brought those new people in and enabled those contributions. That reorganisation enabled them to achieve their goals.
Great, thank you, Zoe. And just moving on from that, I've got a couple more polls for you, just to have a think about. So if we can just go on to the next slide, great. So the first poll here is about your marketing and comms, and how often are you including volunteering in your marketing and comms? So that might be social media, it could be club newsletters, anything that you're putting out there, whether that's successful volunteering stories, volunteering opportunities, thanking your volunteers. Yeah, so a few options there. Can't remember the last time, rarely, occasionally, and regularly. So I'll just give you a few more seconds to fill that in. Lovely, thank you. I will end that one there and share those with you. So a bit of a mixed bag really, but we've got a few of can't remember the last time, few rarelys, majority going for occasionally, and 3 people saying regularly. So that might be something to kind of take away with you and have a think about after this evening. And if you have a marketing or comms lead or somebody who volunteers specifically for your social media, it might just be worth having a conversation with them about how you include volunteering a bit more often. So I'll stop sharing that one with you. That's kind of covered the volunteering recruitment element for this evening, but we also wanted to touch on volunteer retention as well. Obviously, it's great to bring in new volunteers, but it's really important that they're having a positive experience so that they're not leaving just as fast as they're coming in. So our question here is about how often you're checking in with your volunteers. And when we say checking in, that doesn't need to be a super formal process. It could just be having a chat with them, making sure that they're happy in their role, if there's anything they'd like to be added. So again, we've got those same options of can't remember the last time, rarely, occasionally, and regularly. So I'll just give you a few more seconds to answer that one around check-ins. Lovely, thank you. You're all very speedy on these buttons. It's great when you can see them all coming in so quickly. So I'll just give you a couple more seconds, but I think we're nearly there on that one. Great, thank you. I will end that one there and share it with you. So that's quite nice to see. We've got nobody there saying that they can't remember the last time they checked in with volunteers. And 48%, so pretty much half, saying that that is something that you do on a regular basis. Steph's going to talk a bit more about that kind of positive volunteer experience, but checking in with volunteers is really something that will make them feel valued. And also you'll find out from them, you know, if they're ready to step up and take something else on, or if maybe they want to take a bit of a step back. It's a really important part of the process. So I will stop sharing that one with you now.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sophie. So as Sophie mentioned, once you've recruited new volunteers, it's obviously really important to provide that positive experience. And whilst that wasn't the focus for this webinar, we felt it was important to talk about it and signpost to a few resources that might be helpful. So once you've recruited the volunteer, it's obviously really important to provide an induction so that volunteers are aware of and feel comfortable with what they're doing and who they can speak to if they need help. I know that everybody is very busy and that can be hard to fit in. So we do have a range of resources to help with this, including a basic checklist to work through to ensure that you're including the right information in that induction. And we'll pop a link to that in the chat now. And I know that can take a little bit more time up front, but by providing the information that a new volunteer needs from the off, it can really help them understand the role and the workings of the club and see the impact that they're making. And then once someone that's started, I think most importantly is that ongoing communication and checking in to see how it's going. And as Sophie said, that doesn't need to be really time intensive. It could be catching up over a cup of tea, just to try and help identify, are there any challenges? And if there are, it provides a little bit of time to think about, is there anything that the club can do as a whole to support the volunteer and improve that experience? Or if not, it may provide time to put steps in place to recruit a successor. Open conversations with volunteers about their roles and future plans are really important for this. And it's inevitable that volunteers will leave due to various reasons, but just spending a little bit of time to understand why, and if there's anything that can be done to make the role more enjoyable, it can help improve the experience, either for the current person or for the next person that may be taking up that role. And then finally, I just wanted to talk about volunteer recognition. And again, something that I'm sure a lot of you do at your club. Would love to hear the ideas of how you go about this. But just that saying thank you and showing appreciation is one of the biggest factors in providing a positive environment. And we know that from the National Rugby Survey and also from the Sport England surveys that they've done as well. And with so much going on at the club, it can be easy to forget about this element, but whether it's face-to-face, a text, a club email, or a thank you at an event, it's so important just to make sure that volunteers feel appreciated. And whilst there are the volunteer awards and the Honda Volunteer of the Year, I had to get that shameless plug in, a regular thank you, acknowledgement after a training session, sending a birthday or Christmas card, mentioning the work of volunteers at events can have just as much of an impact. And again, I'm sure you've all got a lot of ideas in this space, but we have got a one-pager that just might give you another couple of ideas to take away, discuss with the club and have a think about. And again, this will be a link that we pop in the chat and also send out to you after. So I know we've covered quite a lot in this webinar. And as I mentioned at the start, we know there's only so much capacity to do some of this, but hopefully there's 1 or 2 points that you've taken from this that you can take away, discuss at the next meeting you've got with the wider club, and maybe put 1 or 2 of these things in place. So just to recap on a couple of those key points. So knowing your end goal and what you want to achieve allows you to identify what roles or tasks need doing. And that enables you to provide that specific information so people know what they're putting themselves forward for. And thinking about and sharing how it can be done flexibly makes it far more appealing to a larger audience. And this allows you or your marketing and communications lead to get the message out to that larger audience, focusing on the positives that volunteering can provide and just ultimately making the ask in a slightly more attractive way. Finally, the club examples that we've referenced today have all been delivered as part of the volunteer recruitment programme. Some of you may have heard of, and some of you may have been involved in this already. It's been running for the last 2 seasons. So if your club is looking to recruit more volunteers, then the volunteer recruitment programme is going to be available next season. The programme provides clubs, constituent bodies, referee societies with the opportunity to apply for funding of £500 and access a range of online resources to help plan and deliver a volunteer recruitment activity. And this could be any of the activities that we've talked about today. So it could be a volunteer open evening, it could be a volunteer work party, or it could be targeted marketing and communications. So if you haven't been successful before, then you can apply to the programme. Applications will be open in November, and details of this will be shared via the community game updates and social media channels once it is live. You can also ask your club developer for details. Included in the online resources that we've done, we've got 8 or 9 case studies of clubs that have taken part in the programme and have seen some success with it, just to give you a few ideas as well about what you might want to deliver. So that is everything from us tonight. You will see some of the resources that we have touched on there, and this will come round to you as a follow-up, and it's also in the chat. Really appreciate you giving up your time to join us tonight, and hopefully it has given you some food for thought and provided a couple of ideas to take away. Before we finish, I will just ask Sophie if there's any questions from the chat that haven't been answered, and if there is any questions from anyone on the call that they want to pop in the chat now, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, we haven't had any questions popped in there yet, but what I would say is if you've not had a chance to read the chat as we go along, then please do. I think Steph mentioned at the beginning, there's a lot of knowledge in the room this evening, and some people have made some really great suggestions around kind of the updating of role descriptors, about mentors for new volunteers, about who they reach out to in their community, and community days and different ideas for awards. So if you haven't had a chance to, I would say have a look back through that and pick up some really great ideas there.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Sophie. So if there are no other questions, then that just leaves me to say thank you very much. Really appreciate you joining us tonight. Like I say, we'll be sending a link to the recording and a link to all of the resources. And if you have got any questions, feedback, or you would like to use the volunteer recruitment open evening template, then do just drop us a line. But otherwise, I'll give you 10 minutes back and wish you all a really good evening. Thank you for joining.